RFM folks are going to love tonight's show. I can't believe apologists are this deceptive.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Mormonism Live. How are you doing, Mr. Real?
I couldn't be better, RFM. I am so excited for tonight's program. It's going to be a blast.
You're beaming like a schoolboy.
Yeah, because when you and I first started doing things together, we would take these things that general authorities would say and broadcast, and we would do, take a 15-minute talk, and we'd do 3-4 hours sometimes. And people seem to really love those. And that's really sort of how Mormonism Live came to be, was because folks enjoyed you and I working together. And tonight, just as I prepared for this and you shared your thoughts and I added some things in, I felt like it was going to turn into one of those episodes where you and I had a lot of cool things to say about what will become really clear as apologists overreaching seemingly intentionally and missing the mark when it's all said and done.
Yes, well, as we both know, and I think our audience knows, Scripture Central, the apologetic organization for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has been in the process of producing a series of films called A Marvelous Work and a Wonder, hence our title, A Marvelous Work and a Blunder, as we respond to those. They got the first episode out, it was about, a month ago. Then we did an episode on it. Now, the second episode of Marvelous Work and a Wonder, part 2, came out 12 days ago. And that's what we're going to be reviewing tonight. It's already up over 60,000 views. So these are very popular amongst the faithful. And we're going to be reviewing it. And at the end of it, I think all of us are going to be scratching our heads and wondering, how is it these are popular among the faithful? Because if anything, these seem to decrease faith in the Book of Mormon as opposed to increasing faith in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. And the only thing I want to add before we start is that for folks who are tuning in as believers, and you're always looking for things to bolster up your faith, and the apologists are very good at presenting things that are high quality, good music, great script. But I'm going to beg you to just sit with us for a couple of hours as we go through this material. And I think you will clearly see that the strength of evidence as they insist on it is completely different than reality. It's like they live in bizarro world. And I know as a believer, you want to find evidences that bolster up your faith. But also, I'm hoping that at least some of you are willing to see through a glass less darkly and see things as they really are.
Okay, very good. Well, I know that they've put millions and millions of dollars into this movie and into this series of movies. It's obvious there's a lot of money in it. They've gone to foreign countries. They've taken their camera crew, their sound crew, the whole 9 yards. It's very, very high production quality, even higher than Mormonism Live, dare I say. But it's 38 minutes long. Part 2 is 38 minutes long. They go a full almost 5 minutes into it before they even present their first evidence. And yes, I'm putting that in air quotes, but there's a full 5 minutes, or at least a full 4 minutes that goes on. In other words, a full 1/10 of the time, 4 minutes to 40 minutes, rounding 38 up to 40. They take a 10th of their time and blow it on fluff. It is obvious to me they are not excited about getting into the evidence right away, knowing they only have 38 minutes to present as much evidence as they can cram into this. No, it's like they are putting fluff at the beginning, lots of fluff at the end that we'll talk about. And oh, by the way, we'll talk about a few evidences here as we go along.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun little ride, folks, so buckle up.
And the first one's not an evidence. They're going to talk with a rabbi, right? You
Correct.
Take us through these slides, Bill.
Great. Let me throw the slideshow up on the screen. Here we go. This was our thumbnail we created. We wanted something with Scott on it. He is the gentleman who takes us on this ride, but I will take us to the next slide here.
Scott Christopher is our host. Yes. And the first thing he's going to do is he's going to meet with a rabbi named Joe Charnes. They call him Rabbi Joe.
As I begin my search for literary evidence in the Book of Mormon, I first want to investigate its claim of rich Hebraic symbolism. And what better way to do so than to speak with a Jewish rabbi? This is awesome.
Thank you.
A very unique experience. I'm here with Rabbi Joe Charnes. As you know, we've been on a journey looking for quote unquote evidence about the Book of Mormon, which you hold a copy in your hand right there. Is that your own personal copy?
Yes, sir.
And who gave you that? Where did that come from?
This I got from one of the wards. I regularly attend your ward meetings.
Have you had a chance to read any parts of the Book of Mormon? Are you familiar with its content at all?
Yes, I've looked at certainly the portions you asked me to in the Book of Jacob.
Right. Okay. So for that one, for example, seems to be really rich. It kind of jumps off the page as feeling very connected to the Bible, like it sounds biblical. And by that I mean the Jewish Bible. It sounds like the first 5 books of the Old
Like
Testament.
the King James Bible.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Were you ending the clip there anyway?
No, that's where it ended. So no,
good,
we're good.
good. It even sounds like the King James Bible. It's amazing. How do you account for that, Rabbi Joe? So it's interesting that when we're starting with evidence, I don't usually think of something as looking at an interpretation, a spiritual interpretation of a passage or an allegory, in this case from Jacob 5 in the Book of Mormon. That's where they choose to start, because interpretations are inherently subjective. And it's great if somebody can get a positive spiritual message out of a book, including the Book of Mormon, including Jacob chapter 5, and the rabbi's going to proceed to try and pull something like that out of it. But it doesn't really strike me as proving that the Book of Mormon is actually ancient and therefore authentic. So I'm not even sure they've really started with their evidences yet, even though that's what they claim to have done.
If Rabbi Joe Charnes thought the Book of Mormon was an ancient text, Rabbi Joe Charnes wouldn't be a rabbi.
He'd be Elder Joe Charnes.
The other cool thing, I wanted you to chat about it, but don't you find it interesting, the answer when he asked him if he is read out of the Book of Mormon?
Yes, he answers like an expert witness being direct examined. So have you read from the Book of Mormon? Well, I've read the parts you asked me to read for this interview. Yeah, I've read Jacob 5 because you asked me to. It's just like, where's the editor in this? I think they should have spent more money on an editor of this, because lots of these strange, anomalous things keep getting included that I would have expected to have hit the cutting room floor on the first edit. So, but we do get the experience, it appears, of the question being asked for the first time, which it shouldn't be, any more than if I've got a witness that's my witness that's on the stand that I'm asking them for the first time these questions in front of a jury and I don't know what they're going to say. Bad idea. But it seems like that's what we get. And so, have you read this before? Well, I've read the part you asked me to read. Oh, okay, great. Let's go on. And we'll see more and more of that as we go on throughout this show. This is a spiritual
We have
part.
the olive here, and there's a grafting on from the wild olive branches to the
Right.
tame olive branches. Sometimes we die out.
Mhm.
And we need that grafting on. And if you read, I mean, it's so beautiful. There's a verse in verse 22. The Lord of the vineyard says unto his servant, he says, counsel me not.
For I knew that it was poor.
It was a poor spot of ground. Wherefore I said unto thee, I have nourished it this long time, and thou behold that it hath brought forth much fruit.
Mhm.
It's that same idea.
Mhm.
I am impoverished. I am broken. I am lost, beaten down,
Yeah.
but it can still produce fruit. I am beaten, crushed for light. I can still have that light, that hope, that presence,
Yeah.
that beauty.
I love that. Yeah.
Yes, my head is bloody but unbowed. It's that kind of stuff, which is all great. If you can get a positive message out of the Book of Mormon, God bless you, Rabbi Joe Charnes. But please notice one thing here. First off, it's not evidence of anything. Second off, notice the exact part of this allegory. They're going to focus on this allegory, I'd say, for the most part of this show, where they're doing anything that really has to do with evidence. It's going to be mostly the allegory. And they're starting with this. But it is the part of the allegory where he says the wild olive branches are being grafted into the tame olive tree. Okay. They are spiritualizing that part of the allegory, and there's a reason that they're doing that, which we'll come to later. And I might as well go ahead and let the cat out of the bag now. It's because that doesn't happen in horticulture. You cannot take a wild olive tree, graft it to a tame branches from a wild olive tree into a tame olive tree and have those branches then become tame or cultivated. Doesn't happen in horticulture. That's why they have to spiritualize it.
I thought it was interesting that when Rabbi Joe Charnes starts to read the verse, Scott comes in and sort of goes, "Yeah, for I knew," like but remember, he's the one who gave Joe which verses to read. It sort of comes off like, "Oh yeah, I know the Book of Mormon well too. I know what verse you're reading." Well, sure as hell you do. You're the one who planted the evidence, essentially.
Counsel me not.
Yeah. So I thought that was strange.
Good point.
All right, here's the next one.
So in the allegory in Jacob 5, there's a lot of talk about the master of the vineyard grafting in tame olive branches onto a wild tree and wild olive branches onto a tame tree.
Yeah.
Is there anything symbolically in there that jumps out to you as a rabbi, as a member of the Jewish faith? Is there anything even just personally from the grafting discussion that
The grafting, we know, is central to this section of Jacob. Grafting for me is something I always hope and seek to do because it allows me to help sprout new branches, strengthen my roots, and grow as a person of soul. It can compromise us. If you graft onto something that isn't healthy or healing,
right?
it will compromise your root.
Right.
But it also, in the end, can heal and allow you to rebuild if you prune and if you dig and if you nourish.
So Donnie Lee Gringo in Brazil is asking, how is this proving the historicity? I think that's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it.
It seems like, as you pointed out in the first comment as we got into Joe Charnes, Joe is a rabbi who's going like, okay, I can find some spiritual meaning here. There are application to real life, but nothing about what Joe is giving us indicates that this is an ancient text that Joe believes is an ancient text.
I think they're trying to make the Book of Mormon sound spiritually profound. And that's kind of why they started off with this talk about Don Quixote, the book, 1615 in Spain. And they're trying to raise the Book of Mormon in a literary category up to the level of Don Quixote. I think that's going to be a hard sell amongst all but the most faithful members of the LDS Church. Maven.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to pop in and say something that I found interesting is that where Rabbi Joe is coming from, and I mean, there's a lot of different Jewish sects, so of course, there's nothing that really applies to everyone. But overwhelmingly, I feel like Jewish scholars, their treatment of Scripture is very different from us, and they don't treat it literally. They look at what can be learned from it rather than looking at it as like hardcore historical documents or hardcore, doctrinal statements. That's how a lot of them approach this at all. And I just thought it was really kind of ironic that, I mean, first of all, that is what Rabbi Joe was doing. And to me, if you watch the whole thing in the original video, I actually found his lessons to be quite beautiful and better than lessons that I usually had around this allegory, around this chapter, because they focused on the grafting and stuff so much. Anyway, I really liked what he was doing, but the irony here is that Scott is there trying to use Rabbi Joe plus the other places they go in this video to try to prove the historicity and literality of the Book of Mormon. So it's just completely opposite goals, and I just found that really interesting, I guess, and ironic that I think what Scott's trying to do is so much less valuable than what Rabbi Joe was trying to do. And I think removes a lot of meaning that can be found if members of the church didn't try so hard to make this real. So that's my thoughts on that.
And I wonder if the reason they put this spiritualizing aspect of the grafting and the olive tree allegory into this part is because later on, when they go back to Spain, which I doubt they actually went back to Spain, they're supposed to be in Spain now talking to the rabbi. If you watch the whole movie, then they talk to a professor in Provo. We'll get to that. Then they go back to Spain. They actually talk with a guy who's a real olive horticulturalist in Spain, in the shadow of the oldest olive tree in the world that people know of. And it's beautiful, except for the fact that that interview explodes so dramatically on the apologists, where poor Luis, who's the name of the guy, who's the horticulturalist, who knows what he's talking about, he gives the answers to the questions, but they are the wrong answers. They contradict what the Book of Mormon says happened in the allegory on 2 occasions. And I think that it may be because those exploded so dramatically. First off, I can't believe they left him in the movie, but they did. Thank you. That maybe they thought they needed to shore it up a little bit with some spiritualizing.
Yeah, and wasn't it you, Maven, you mentioned, and maybe it was another podcast that did it, but that Jacob chapter 5, at least in part, is talking about the falling away of the Jews, hence you need to create live branches from a dead tree. And he goes to a Jewish rabbi and presents to him a scripture that is essentially assailing the Jewish people, and then asks the
That was
rabbi what he
something
thinks about it.
yeah, that was something I thought, but Mormonish also covered it as well. So yeah, it's just I think it's another way that shows really how insensitive Mormons can be, and considering that, I think Rabbi Joe handled that very well, and
Yeah.
and it seems to be kind of his thing to really be a bridge builder and not maybe take offense or um, react differently. He could have chosen a different path, an educational one maybe, but he stayed kind. That's the decision that he made.
Yeah,
He seems
totally.
very ecumenical.
And by the way, let's get to his ecumenability, which is that Joe Charnes isn't just a random rabbi. They didn't just pick out the yellow pages and say, "Hey, we need to sit with a rabbi and see
In
what they think
Spain.
about the Book of Mormon." Right? This is right. He's not. First off, he's not in Spain. So let me just show you. Rabbi Joe Charnes has been interacting with the LDS faith for years. He is, and again, I don't mean this in any rude way. He sounds like a great guy. He is the token rabbi that the church puts out in front of the camera anytime they want to talk about them having interfaith work with the Jewish faith. And so Rabbi Joe Charnes here on BYU Radio is in a podcast, in the In Good Faith podcast, Rabbi Joe Charnes, episode 181. So there's one. Church News, episode 157, Rabbi Joe Charnes on the power of General Conference, a member of a different faith. By the way, this is what he specializes in. What you and Maven just said, he specializes in interfaith work. He goes around to a handful of churches and works on building a relationship with them. Of course, he's only going to say nice things.
Yeah. He's a nice guy.
Yeah. So Church News, General Conference. Here's why one rabbi loves General Conference and his approach to finding deep wisdom in the talks. Again, he will take something like the Book of Mormon, which he doesn't believe to be historical, and he finds wisdom where maybe few others would.
You mean like in General Conference?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Here is Carrie Molstein's podcast, which I didn't even know Carrie had one. I got to imagine those 13 listeners are having the ride of their life. The Scriptures Are Real. Carrie Molstein, season 2, episode 79, Rabbi Joe Charnes on General Conference and Peace and Grace in Colossians. So there's that. And I just wanted to note several pictures. My favorite one, by the way, is the upper right-hand corner where Joe Charnes is hanging out with the Bonnie Cordon family. So there's that. But
they love their rabbi.
He is prevalent in interactions with the LDS faith. If you're going to go create an evidence video about the church and you need a rabbi and you're Mormon, this is the guy you call. And again, he doesn't believe in Mormonism. He doesn't think the Book of Mormon's an ancient text, but he is the guy you can count on to say nice things.
In section 2 now they come back from Spain and they go to Provo, specifically to Brigham Young University to talk with Professor Donald W. Perry and his new book, Preserved in Translation, which I think must be a play on the title, Lost in Translation. He's going to say Preserved in Translation, Hebrew and other ancient literary forms in the Book of Mormon. We'll see how this goes.
I am here with Don Perry, author of Preserved in Translation, and a lot of other books. This is, I can probably attest that this is the narrowest book that you've possibly ever written.
Probably so.
What? They're laughing, but why are we laughing?
Well, because it's evidence for the Book of Mormon. Hebraisms, Hebrew style things in the text of the Book of Mormon that he has assimilated, and it's the narrowest book that Scott Christopher has ever seen. Why would that be funny? I don't know.
Right.
It's like the old book that you find in the gift store, you know, and he says everything I know about women, and you open up and there's nothing on the pages. So the Hebrew evidence for the Book of Mormon is in what they say is the narrowest book that they have ever seen.
And when we get done with this section, you're going to learn that this book should have actually been a whole hell of a lot thinner.
Yes, it could have. Hey, Bill, by the way, are you able to click the slide a little bit to move it down in the frame? It was up a little bit high and their heads were cut off.
Yeah, it shows up full here, so I can't do anything about it. I'm really sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay,
Just wanted to ask.
let me go to the next one here.
Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, so let's see your view slideshow. So section 2, this is we did that already. Oop, that's not the right one. Add to the stage. Section 2, part A, switching the order of a sentence. So here's an evidence. I think this might be our first one.
The Hebrew Bible, it's what I do. It's my job.
But what are Hebraisms, and why would it matter to us on our quest to find evidence for the Book of Mormon?
We're talking about Hebraisms in the Book of Mormon, and Hebraisms are Hebrew-like structures, poetic parallelisms. They are figures of speech or literary techniques that survive the translation and that are in the Book of Mormon.
What are some of your favorite Hebraisms from the Book of Mormon?
One was not even known until the 1950s when a Jewish scholar whose name is Moses Seidel, he demonstrated that one way that ancient prophets would cite or quote another prophet is to switch a key phrase with another key phrase. And he gave some examples from the Old Testament. There are maybe 8 or 10 examples of this same thing going on in the Book of Mormon. And I'll give you one example. Isaiah the prophet wrote precept upon precept, line upon line. Notice the order of that.
Yeah.
Nephi cited Isaiah and switched those key terms, and he said line upon line, precept upon precept. That's found in 2 Nephi 28, verse 30.
And in that verse, he's not saying
Right.
Isaiah said.
Right.
This
Correct.
is their way of quoting someone.
Yes, and you were supposed to know the scriptures well enough to know,
Can you freeze there?
Nephi's citing Isaiah right now.
What's that,
Can you
RFM?
freeze that right there?
Yeah.
Okay. Scott Christopher was asking him, saying, so he's not saying this is what was said. Well, actually, he is. 2 Nephi 28:30, for behold, thus saith the Lord God, begin quotation marks. I will give unto the children of men line upon line, precept upon precept. So he actually is denoting by a more standard method that he is quoting something from the Lord God.
Yeah. We can finish this before I share my 2 cents, but
Yeah, I'm underwhelmed so far with this one.
yeah.
And when we quote someone, we will say, and President so-and-so or Professor so-and-so said this, and we'll use quote marks.
Right.
And then we'll have a bibliographic footnote.
So switching words or phrases is evidence of ancient Jewish or Hebrew origin. Is that what he said?
Yes, it's an evidence that they are quoting something from the scriptures, and they're marking the fact he didn't even say beginning a quote, but that's what I thought he meant by changing 2 key phrases in it.
You mean like deniable plausibility? My point is that the human brain, especially if you have a translator who's really not translating, he's just dictating a made-up text, you sort of would want to make allowances that he might accidentally or intentionally reverse wording or phrases, and such would have no meaning on whether the doing so actually is an indicator of something being an ancient text. For instance, I often have said deniable plausibility when the correct phrase is plausible deniability, and it wasn't until I was corrected several times and Maven had a little gift made for me where, see if I cover up my eyes, if it'll maybe focus in on that. Oop, I don't think it's going to. But anyway, it's a little piece of wood that's got carved into it, plausible deniability, because that's the correct way to say it. And I don't have anything here going with ancient Jewish or Hebrew origin.
No, that's where you're mistaken.
Yeah.
That
It must
mistake
be.
shows that you are an ancient Hebrew prophet, Mr. Real. And the other funny thing was that we were just talking about this, the three of us, earlier this afternoon before the show. And there was one part of the show that they put up, the Marvelous Work and a Wonder, where they spend like the last quarter or last third just having a fast and testimony meeting with one Spanish lady in a park in Spain. That's all it is. And Maven had thought that that had occurred at the first part of the show. And we were talking about the fact that she was confused on that. And I said, well, you know what this means, don't you, Maven? This means that you are ancient Hebrew.
Yeah, it doesn't
Anytime
seem...
you mix something up, all of a sudden now you're a Hebrew. I don't understand that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you wanted to point it out, but it's not that they really quoted the verses correct from Isaiah in the first place.
Right, and this is right next to a place where they're quoting Isaiah 29 in chapter 27 of 2nd Nephi. But the other thing that's interesting about it, and we're not going to go off in the weeds on that, if you can go back to it where it has both of them together and freeze on that.
I can try.
While you're doing, I'll go ahead and say that when Isaiah is using this, he says precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line. And then when Nephi paraphrases it, he says line upon line, precept on precept. And I can remember that one because of My Turn on Earth, right? And we all know the song. But that's the opposite of the way that Isaiah said it. The thing is that when Isaiah says it, it's a negative thing. This is how the wicked stumble and are taken in a snare. And that's right there in that verse. And when it's changed to Nephi saying it, now it's a positive thing. And this is how God teaches his children his truth. So I see that you're working on that. Is it really close?
It is right here.
You are the man. So just really quick, you'll see in Isaiah on the right, line upon line, here a little and there a little, that they may go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. Not a good thing. This is not a positive way to teach. And then the other one for 2nd Nephi 28, when it gets flipped, it says, and blessed are those who hearken unto my precepts and lend an ear unto my counsel. So it is the opposite interpretation that's being placed upon this passage from Isaiah, which makes one wonder, because Nephi made such a big deal out of the fact that he quotes all this Isaiah because it's so great. And he understands Isaiah because he lived among the Jews in Jerusalem, and nobody can understand Isaiah like the Jews who lived in Jerusalem. And here's Nephi showing how much he understands it as a Jew who came from Jerusalem, which is exactly the opposite of what it actually means.
Yeah, and as you see Dan Vogel there, the same thing is used in Doctrine and Covenants section 98, and that is a contemporary work that we would all, even as believers in the church, admit is not an ancient Jewish origin. It's God talking to Joseph Smith in the here and now, and hence, if it is evidence of an ancient origin, then the Doctrine and Covenants would be an ancient text, and that's not the case. This is just a faulty way of thinking to make this be evidence for the Book of Mormon being ancient.
Yeah. And that's about all I have to say about this. I really, I used to be into this so much back in the 1980s, and the Hebraisms and the chiasmus and the parallelism and the reverse parallelism, all that stuff, right? And now I look at it and I'm just left, I mean, how is this impressive at all?
Yeah, totally. All right. And then our next section here is section 2, part B, Hebrew names, such as Alma.
Can you hang on just a second?
Yeah.
Because I got to tell you the story on Alma. I won't tell you the whole story. We'll get to the whole story on Alma.
I love it.
But honestly, when this came out 12 days ago, I saw that it had dropped, and I sent it to you. I sent it to Maven. I sent it to, I think, Rebecca, to let you know that it had dropped, because obviously we're going to want to talk about it at some point. And I had not had a chance to start watching it. I was doing something else. And you're watching it, and I'm seeing your text come back, and you're saying Alma exclamation point. And I'm going, you got to be kidding me. They're not talking about Alma again, are they? As a name, as proof, and as evidence of the Book of Mormon. I thought we had driven a stake in Alma's heart, cut his head off his body, buried them in separate locations 5 years ago. And now here he comes back from the grave to haunt us again.
Yeah. We are going to take that dead horse and we're going to beat the living hell out of it once again, because this is such a horrible apologetic approach. So with that, here is, I believe, the first video as soon as it shows up.
Have you brought any other examples?
Are names. There are some Hebrew names in the Book of Mormon that were unknown to the world when Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon. I'll give you one example that I really, really like, and it's the name Alma. Now, when Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon, as you know, the name Alma appears many, many times there.
Yeah.
And some of the people who didn't understand the Book of Mormon thought maybe Joseph had borrowed the word Alma from the Latin or the Spanish.
Yes,
Is it also in the Spanish?
Alma means soul.
Soul, yes.
Spirit.
And they thought, okay, he must have borrowed it from the Latin. But the name Alma was discovered in a legal deed in a cave south of the Dead Sea Scrolls caves. And it was discovered, and it has the name Alma, the son of Judah, written in Hebrew.
So there it is.
It's a Hebrew word. Now, this letter or deed is dated to around 132 AD. So it's centuries before Joseph Smith brought forth the Book of Mormon.
Okay, Bill. You want to talk about this, or shall I? Going back, 5 years. I want you to. Can you tell the story? You let me know if you want me to, because there we are. This is an early episode. What episode? This is number 4. It says Mormonism Live, number 4, The Rise and Fall of Alma as Apologetic. This is from, what is it from? Is it 2019? No, it's 2020, because it's this show, but we're talking about what happened in 2019, right?
Right.
And how we had finally brought Daniel C. Peterson, the godfather of Mormon apologetics, also known as the Artful Dodger of Mormon apologetics, to his knees, making him bend the knee, kiss the ring, and admit that Alma is not a great evidence for the Book of Mormon, because you could not swing a dead cat in Joseph Smith's neighborhood without hitting a guy named Alma.
Yeah. And in that blog post, so the original blog post by Dan Peterson, Alma, Deception, and I, he talks about how he's, used the name in the past as an evidence. In the comments, if you go to the comments of that blog post, you get a Dr. Detroit. And I don't know if you know who that is, because you participate in those blogs.
Okay, will you hang on just a second? Because you're being too humble right now. You brought Daniel Peterson to the point of writing that blog, which he did not do of his own free will and volition back on July 31st, 2019, which I believe was the date of it, because you were up in his grill all over the internet about his using Alma as an evidence for the Book of Mormon, when actually Joseph Smith knew tons of guys, had to have known tons of guys with the name Alma. It was extremely prevalent in his day. And so he writes this article on his blog at Sick et Non, and in the comments section, some individual named Dr. Detroit starts throwing in his face all of this research, easily obtainable, about all the guys named Alma in Joseph Smith's day.
Yeah, but it gets way worse than this. So as you point out, Dr. Detroit lists, 50 Almas or so. And Daniel then comments next and say, none of these are in Palmyra, New York. So then Dr. Detroit comes back and says, well, actually, there's several male Almas in Palmyra, New York. And so I, just preparing for this conversation, went and looked up some of them. And what I ended up doing, let me put it up on the screen here. So what I ended up doing was going to Family Search. There's no better place to get our point of view as evidence than to go right to the horse's, to the horse's mouth, and get off of Family Search. Look for people whose name you'll see on the right-hand side, my filter, First name's Alma, males. I put Wayne County, New York, because I wanted it to start with getting the closest ones to there. Born between 1750 and 1830. What came up were 223,000 search results. And you say, well, maybe these aren't males. Let's click some of them. So first off, the red ones are ones that I've already clicked, and those are men. But just to play the game, let's pick some that I haven't clicked and see. So we have Alma Waters. Let's see what gender he is. Oh, Alma Waters is a male. Now, if I go back here, Alma Waters was born 1858 in New York. Okay, well, how about Alma Brooks, born 1819 in New York? Well, Alma Brooks is a male. So there's another Alma. And you can scroll this forever. And let's do Alma Messenger. Maybe this one's a female. Let's see. Oh, no, that's another male named Alma. And I'm just telling you, you can click any one of these, and these are all men. So these are all Almas who are males, who are born in the United States, mostly New York, who were born between the years of 1750 and 1830. And the list goes forever. Now, when you look at things as evidence, is it greater to find the contemporary thing where they are almost innumerable, or is it more reasonable and rational to go find the one male that is in ancient Jewish documents and point to that and go, oh, that proves the Book of Mormon's an ancient document? It seems to me it makes way more sense to go, there are Almas in every neighborhood in New York who are boys, who are male. It becomes unnecessary to go find an Alma in ancient Jewish documents, because this is sufficient to show that Joseph Smith could have easily thought of Alma as a male name.
Yeah. And in that episode where we talk about it, and I invite you all to go back and watch it, we talk about all of this. We lay out all the evidence. We play the clips from Daniel C. Peterson where he's been announcing how great an evidence it is for the Book of Mormon. And we simply want to hold him accountable to the facts, because what he's doing is he's playing a 3-card Monty. He's telling you about Alma in the Book of Mormon. He's telling you about the fact that there's really no men around today named Alma. If you know an Alma, it's probably a girl. And then he drops the deed from the Bar Kokhba documents and says, well, here's Alma ben Yudah. What he doesn't tell you is that there were all sorts of Almas, men named Alma, in Joseph Smith's day. That's the part he leaves out of the equation, and that's the part that he knows. He knows it just as well as Don Perry knows it. And you know how I know that Don Perry knows it? One, because he's not an idiot and he wasn't born yesterday. And also, he avoids saying anything that would be a direct lie. Did you notice that?
Mm-mm.
He dances all around it to give the impression without actually lying about it, which indicates to me he's perfectly aware of this fact.
Yeah. If there are only 5 male Almas within 200 miles of Joseph Smith's home, that makes that explanation exponentially more likely than one male Alma in ancient Israel.
The other thing is that some names go into vogue and out of vogue. Alma is apparently one of those for men, because I was surprised to find that 200 years ago, Alma was a very popular men's name in the United States, in Joseph Smith's area. I would never have thought that. And that plays into the apologist's hands if you remain ignorant of that fact. But here we are 200 years later. Does anybody name their boys Alma anymore? I don't know any. I've never met any. I've never read about any. But that's 200 years. Notice Bar Kokhba documents 132 CE. That's after Christ, right? That is 700 years after Lehi leaves Jerusalem, according to the Book of Mormon. There's 600 years plus the extra century after Christ, right? That's more than 700 years later. Imagine what can happen with a name going in and out of vogue between those time periods. So all I'm saying is that they go in and out of vogue. The main point here is, once again, in spite of the fact that at the end of that show, we say, actually, I think you say, well, I guess we won't be hearing this used as an apologetic again. And I may have laughed and said, well, time will tell, because sometimes these are so attractive to the apologists, they can't seem to let them go, even though they know that they don't stand for what it is they're claiming it stands for anymore.
Yeah. And I only want to ask the viewer, how many times are these evidences discredited before you start to sense that the apologist is being intentionally deceptive? Again, we have one argument that the apologists often use is that I don't know why we're still dealing with these. These issues have been raised by critics over and over and over again. Well, here's the problem. The evidences and the things that the church says and its apologists say about the problems or the historical data points, they're flawed. They've got holes in them, and we've refuted them. We've shown that Alma is a common name. There's zero reason for Fair Mormon, Book of Mormon Central, and Professor Perry from ever using it again. And as you point out, RFM, I would like to think like, oh, like these guys are at least honest enough that at this point they would be ridiculous to keep doing so. And you're like, just watch, it'll happen. And here we are again addressing Alma.
Where is the content supervisor in this show? I mean, there's got to be tens, if not hundreds of people who have their hands into this show. Is there no one who said, maybe it wouldn't be a good idea to use this as an evidence for the Book of Mormon, because it's not an evidence for the Book of Mormon, because there were guys named Alma in Joseph Smith's day. And if we don't say it and Mormonism Live finds out about it, they're going to be shouting it from the rooftops. And how is that going to make you look then, Scott Christopher?
And they've got folks like Neil Rappley, right? Wasn't Stephen Smoot maybe in one of them, I think, in part one? But I know that there was a couple of other apologists. Certainly, there's enough folks who know the banter back and forth that goes between the critics and the apologist. The record has been corrected, and yet you still keep seeing these misnomers making their way into Mormon apologetics.
And even though it would be the right, honorable, ethical, and decent thing to do in part 3 or 4 to issue a retraction or a correction,
Not a chance.
I will bet you dollars to donuts there's no way that's ever going to happen.
Anybody want to take a bet that they'll put out a video that takes all the things that we've said that showed that their evidences aren't nearly as strong and maybe even counter evidence to what they're claiming, and that they'll issue a corrected video? I'll put money on that.
Yeah, or even just this one, because this isn't even a matter of opinion. This is facts that they're omitting to make their evidence look stronger than it is.
Yeah. Okay, you ready for the next part?
Yes, sir.
All right, so now we've got part 2, section C, cognate verbs. This should be interesting.
So one of the ones that I really liked, and there's so many that are so cool in here that I had never heard of, and I can't find it right now, but I remember it had to do with cognates or cognate. Oh, there it is, cognate verbs and objects. Explain to me what that is, or explain to us.
That's a grammatical form where the noun and the verb are the same root. For example, to build buildings, to dream a dream, to sing a song, to curse with a curse.
Let me remind you of some you've got in
Okay,
here.
thanks.
Taxed with a tax.
Yes.
Fear exceedingly with fear.
Yes.
Shielded by shields. Now, those are the ones that you found in the Book of Mormon.
Yes. This is very, very Hebrew. And here they are in the Book of Mormon, and they survived the translation into English, showing Joseph Smith was an amazing translator. I mean, he translated by the power of God.
Thank you. I mean, there's 15 or 20 right there.
Yes.
And I read those every day in the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
And now I know, that's how they did it in Hebrew.
Have you ever heard build a building in modern day from people around you talking about construction?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that imply that it's ancient? How about sing a song? You know what, everybody? I'm going to do a karaoke. I'm going to stand up and sing a song.
Well, it's kind of like the Carpenters. Sing a song. Come on.
Must be ancient. I'm surprised we haven't found chiasmus in that.
Yeah, dream a dream. Honestly, when I got the soundtrack to Les Mis back in the early 90s, and they had the one great song in it, which is I Dreamed a Dream in Days Gone By, I hated that song. I mean, I loved it, but I hated it because I knew that they were using that cognate accusative. I knew that they were using an evidence that the Book of Mormon is ancient, and I didn't like it because Les Mis is not an ancient Hebrew musical.
Yeah, I find it so odd that in the middle of trying to present cognate verbs as evidence of an ancient text, he uses as examples modern cognate verbs that all of us have heard. That seems so strange.
Right, and taxing a tax, shielding a shield. I don't know. But I will say that when you get to these other more abstruse forms, that typically in English society, what we do is we try and differ the verb from the noun, right? We don't want to say, build a building, I think was pretty much common. I mean, what else are you going to say? Erect a building, that can lead to its own problems.
Yeah.
So we just say build a building.
Swing.
Or build an erection, right? No, we just stick with build a building in polite society. And dream a dream and sing a song. Yeah, we got that. But when you get beyond that, it is typically looked at as a mark of lower education in our society if you can't structure a sentence in such a way that you're not repeating yourself within the same sentence or even in nearby sentences. So we try and avoid that if we can. And when we hear someone doing that, we're more likely to think that they are not very educated, as opposed to thinking this must be an ancient Hebrew I'm speaking to.
Yeah. And while we can talk about Joseph Smith being educated at home, we can talk about him being an intelligent person. I'm more than happy to give him tons of credit there. But at the same time, there's also certain lacks of education going on with him as well. And that's a very good explanation for why this shows up. And as we've shown with modern examples, this certainly is not an evidence of an ancient Hebrew origin.
Read the first original edition of the Book of Mormon. I've got it in replica. I don't have the actual original, but I have read through it. I've read all of it, not just the part that Scott Christopher gave me to read for the show. Yeah, it's very frontier, picturesque kind of grammar.
Little folksy.
Yeah.
All right, you ready for the next one? It gets better, by the way, folks. We started with Joe Charnes, and we're working our way into some of the serious stuff.
Wait till we get back to Spain.
Oh yeah. So here is section 2, part D, and it came to pass. You're not going to believe it, but the hundreds and hundreds of references of "and it came to pass" in the Book of Mormon is an evidence of ancient origin. So
means it's true.
Here it is.
Let me tell you one more.
Okay.
And it came to pass. That seems so innocent, and it came to pass, and yet it is a Hebraism.
But I mean, what makes it so Hebrew, and not because it's worked its way into the English lexicon, at least from a biblical or religious standpoint. So how would I know that really is?
It's found in historical narratives, not so much in poetry. So it's found in Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Chronicles, and those books, not as often in Isaiah or Psalms or Proverbs, the poetry, and it has to do with narrative. This happened, and it came to pass. This happened, and it came to pass. This happened. Very Hebrew.
Yeah, not exactly 19th century North American English.
Awesome. Unless they're reading the King James version that Joseph Smith had in his possession, right?
Constitute yet another.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we still going?
No, it was a long clip, but I think it ended there. So sorry, go ahead.
Well, if it didn't, it should have.
It should have, yes.
Because I mean, they're giving us the answer in their presentation. There's one thing about hiding evidence, and I criticize them for that with the name Alma. I shouldn't criticize them here for giving the other side of the story. But when you give the other side of the story, then you have to ask the question, why are you raising it in the first place? And he says, yeah, you find it came to pass all over the Bible in the narrative parts. Of course, it's in the narrative parts. It's not in the poetry parts, because it's saying, and it came to pass, right? And it came to pass, and then it came to pass. That's a narrative thing. And you find it in Judges and Ruth and Kings and Chronicles and all throughout the historical parts of the Old Testament. So what that tells me is that would be the obvious place that Joseph Smith got it in creating the Book of Mormon in order for it to make it look more like ancient Hebrew scripture.
Yeah. So up on the screen, King James Bible, at the very top left of the image, you'll see search inside. I typed in, quote, came to pass, unquote. There are 409 results. By the way, Book of Mormon has, and it came to pass 890 times, or a variation of it.
It is twice
Now,
as true as the Bible. The Book of Mormon is.
yeah. Instead of saying, and it came to pass, it might have said, now it came to pass. There were some other variations, but most of them are, and it came to pass 890 times. The Bible has 409 times. Now, if you remember at the end of that video, excuse me, sorry about that. At the end of that clip, Scott Christopher says, yeah, that's definitely not a 19th century way of talking. Well, it actually is. The Late
Oops.
War, which is a book that's often referenced as being similar to the Book of Mormon, has 81 references of it, and it came to pass, or it came to pass, or now it came to pass. And they're quite, 81 is significantly less than 800 for sure. But on page 9, page 15, page 19, page 22, page 24, page 26, page 30, page 33, this is half of them on the screen right now. Again, this is absolutely a 19th century way of writing down language or speaking.
In a way that was intentionally done to mimic the scriptural language in the King James Version of the Bible, correct?
Yeah. First book of Napoleon has only 14 times, but it does do it. Page 13, 19, 41, 49, 50, 51, 57, 61, 62, 64, 77, 91, 111, and 113. Interesting note, by the way, Solomon Spaulding's manuscript story and Ethan Smith's View of the Hebrews have 0 came to passes, which I thought was interesting. Doesn't mean anything to me. But note that there are multiple works written in the 19th century that have 0 problem putting came to pass, and it came to pass, now it came to pass, soon it, whatever, just over and over and over again. This is not evidence of anything.
I would just say that in view of the Hebrews, it doesn't surprise me that there would be no it came to passes, because there's no narrative in the book. It's simply a treatise on assimilating evidences that Ethan Smith believes showed that the modern day, as of his day, Native Americans were descended from the Jews.
Right. Okay. Section 3, olive horticulture.
Okay, now we're going to get back to Jacob chapter 5. We had a break from Rabbi Joe Charnes, and then we talked to Don Perry, but we're coming back to Jacob 5 and the olive horticulture, because if anything proves the Book of Mormon is true, it is how accurate it is in describing ancient olive horticulture among the Jews. No sarcasm there.
Within the Book of Mormon, we learn that Lehi and his seed were led away from Jerusalem because of the wickedness of its people. The Lord of the vineyard planted the Nephites and the Lamanites in a good spot of ground. Yet, in the end, wickedness prevailed, and the Nephite civilization was completely destroyed. The allegory says that the wild fruit of the last had
Can you stop for a
overcome
second,
that
Bill?
part of the tree which...
Can you go back there so we can see the battle scene? I'm noticing that everybody seems to have the same color skin now.
Also, notice there's still metal swords, it appears.
Yeah, it does look like metal. It's either that or, cardboard with aluminum foil wrapped around it.
If you can see my cursor, it does look like there's those edges of the kinds of swords they talk about.
The mahuidal?
Yes, but notice it's done in such a way as to be sort of, you can see it if you're looking for it, but generally they look like they're metal swords.
I just want everyone to understand that the curse of the black skin has been done away with by modern animation.
Yeah. Isn't that weird? The Book of Mormon is no longer a racist text. Okay.
Civilization was completely destroyed. The allegory says that the wild fruit of the last had overcome that part of the tree which brought forth good fruit, even that the branch had withered away and died. This branch that had good and bad fruit, the Nephites and Lamanites, eventually was fully corrupted. The vineyard master is saddened to lose his vineyard, and so plans for a final pruning and grafting of the scattered olive branches back into the main tree.
So there is in animated form and in much synopsized form the allegory of the olive tree in Jacob chapter 5, which is the longest chapter in the Book of Mormon and perhaps the longest allegory in the history of mankind.
Yeah, I was just going to try to pull up here the next thing, but um, you found these. I don't know if this is the right moment for it or not.
Yeah, it's always the right moment for this.
Okay.
I'm just going to click ahead a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
So there is a book published by the church, the Book of Mormon, Jacob Through Words of Mormon, to learn which way. It came out in 1990. It's a collection of essays by different professors at BYU on different parts of the Book of Mormon. Wilford M. Hess contributed his article on this allegory. It's called Botanical Comparisons in the Allegory of the Olive Tree. And it appears in this book, and you can reach it online too, which is where I found it. You'll notice that Wilford M. Hess actually knows what the heck he's talking about, because Wilford M. Hess was, I assume he's deceased, was a professor of botany and range science at Brigham Young University. So he's somebody who actually knows a thing or two about botany and about olive trees, as it turns out. And what he tells us, although he tries to put a very faithful spin on it, he is a faithful member of the church, or was, and professor at BYU. He notes two huge glaring errors in the allegory of the olive tree in Jacob 5, things that do not happen in olive horticulture. And we're going to talk about the first one. There's one up here at the top, then there's one here at the bottom. But the first one is that wild branches can yield tame fruit. Now, understand, that's what the Book of Mormon says happens. It's actually the fundamental turning point in the Book of Mormon's allegory here. It's critical to the allegory that wild branches can yield tame fruit after they've been grafted into a tame tree. This is an example of interpretations that seem to violate botanical rules. They don't just seem to, they violate it, okay? If a wild olive branch is grafted onto a tame olive tree, that branch and all of its growth will retain the same genetics. It doesn't become tame just because it's been grafted onto a tame or cultivated olive tree. It will remain wild and will produce only wild or small seeded bitter fruit, i.e. fruit of low quality. Although the size may increase due to better nutrition, that branch will never have the genetic potential of the branches from domesticated trees. Period. End of quote from this article by the BYU professor of botany. So that's the first thing. We'll get to the other thing here in a bit. But the reason I wanted to talk about it now is because our hero, Scott Christopher, is going to fly to Spain. He's going to talk to Luis, who is the guy with the olive trees, and he knows stuff. He's going to ask him two questions. We have numerous clips, but there's two questions that are the focus of this part based upon this idea in the Book of Mormon. He's going to ask him about, well, what happens if you were to take these branches from a wild olive tree and put them into this tree, blah, blah, blah. And Luis, bless his heart, doesn't give the right answers. He gives the correct answers, but he doesn't give the answers that jibe with the Book of Mormon. And the thing that's amazing is not only did they leave us in, but Scott Christopher appears to interpret what he's saying as if he's actually answering his questions in a way that support the Book of Mormon, when manifestly he is not.
Yeah, and I just want to note before we go to the clips, Jacob chapter 5 is touted out by the apologists every chance they can get. And the argument that they make is that Joseph Smith couldn't possibly have a clue how olive tree horticulture works. So if we find contradictions where Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon imposes that olive tree horticulture works a certain way, and in fact it doesn't, then that is in and of itself the counter argument. And there's plenty more around this issue. And I think this is, to me, the funnest issue of the night. Mm-hmm. It's a counter example. If you're going to argue that the Jacob chapter 5 is an example that Joseph Smith hit the bullseye, when in reality, there are so many problems with Jacob chapter 5, maybe the least of which is that he gets olive horticulture absolutely incorrect.
Right. And I'm sure he knew about some kinds of horticulture. that were native to his neighborhood. He's a farm boy from a farm family, but olives were not among them.
Yeah.
So here's the first clip as he meets Luis. It's a double L. He pronounces it Luis, which is what I would have thought. He gets corrected. This actually is like their very first meeting.
Hello, Luis. Luis. Okay, very good. Scott here. We're of course at this amazing olive orchard called La Rion, and Luis is the owner and whatnot. This tree I see behind us here is roped off, and it looks fairly significant. What is the significance of this tree? How old is it?
It is the oldest olive tree that we know about that is dated by scientific methods. To be honest, it's not a tree that is very strong.
So could you, in theory, since it's not producing as much as you would like it to after 1700 years,
Listen
could you
closely.
theoretically graft younger, newer, stronger branches into it and then see it produce more fruit?
It could be done, but only from shoots from the lowest part of the tree. Recovering the upper part of the tree is very difficult. If we want the tree to recover and regain its vigor and its strength, it is better to create a tree starting from a new branch. In the end, the trunk is a sponge that absorbs the majority of the nutrients and the strength that the two trees have.
It's amazingly similar to Jacob 5, what he's saying.
Except
No,
for
it's
the
not.
fact it's the opposite of what Jacob 5 is saying.
Yeah. What he said is the only way you can make this work is if you take the little branches that are coming out of the ground by the tree that are essentially sort of splitting off to become a tree of their own, right?
Yeah, and plant it separately, and then it becomes its own tree, and then you can get good fruit. This is absolutely not what is represented in Jacob chapter 5 or anywhere else in the Book of Mormon, to my knowledge.
You can say a little BS, use a high quality camera crew, play a little soft music in the background, and everybody feels elevation emotion.
I just can't believe they left this in the show. But they got 38, they only have 38 minutes. Its running time is very short. I mean, they've got to have something in their show, I suppose. So this is what they have. They left it in. And I think that maybe what happened was that this interview with Luis went so badly. And this is one of the places where it explodes in their face. That's when they got the idea. Let's get Rabbi Joe Charnes on here and let's spiritualize this thing, because we got to make something out of this, because making it literal olive horticulture is not doing it.
Yeah. So here you've got Jacob chapter 5 up on the screen.
Right. This is, of course, a representative example where it's talking about that. And it came to pass that the servant said unto his master, how comest thou hither to plant this tree or this branch of the tree? For behold, it was the poorest spot in all the land of thy vineyard. Okay, this is for the next question, because he's going to ask about the poor ground, right? And that's the second thing. I think I have that slide duplicated here in a moment too. And the Lord of the vineyard said unto him, counsel me not. I knew that it was a poor spot of ground. Wherefore I said unto thee, I have nourished it this long time, and thou beholdest that it hath brought forth much fruit. So a tree in the allegory gets planted in poor spot of ground, produces a whole lot of fruit. A lot of good fruit, right? So let me see here if I can.
Here's the other one.
Oh, can you read that for me, Bill?
Yep. So just to note, maybe we can just reiterate the other one before we go to that sound clip. But Jacob chapter 5, verse 18, and he said unto the servant, behold, the branches of the wild tree have taken hold of the moisture of the root thereof. Now, remember, he said that it's the trunk and stuff of the old tree that soaks up all the moisture. That's how olive trees work. That's why you really can't graft them in. You have to do it at these little sprouts coming out at the bottom, because otherwise the main trunk of the tree soaks it up. And the root thereof hath brought forth much strength, and because of the much strength of the root thereof of the branches, the root thereof, the wild branches have brought forth tame fruit. Again, it works the opposite way. Now, if we had not grafted in these branches, the tree thereof would have perished. And now, behold, I shall lay up much fruit, which the tree thereof hath brought forth, and the fruit thereof I shall lay up against the season unto mine own self.
So this is what Jacob 5 says does happen. This is what Professor Hess, the professor of botany, I think it was, from BYU said does not happen. And it's what poor Luis over in Spain is being asked in front of a camera to comment on. And he gives the correct response in as politic a way as he possibly can. But he's being honest and saying how it really happens. And here you got Scott Christopher saying, well, that sounds like the Book of Mormon to me.
And then, I don't know where that went. Let's see here. Let me add that one. So there's the other one. If you wanted to, again,
this is the one about the poor spot of ground where the master of the vineyard in Jacob 5 plants a tree, a poor spot of ground, produces great fruit because he takes care of it and nourishes it for a long time.
Yeah.
And when you go to the article,
that's going to be the clip. So let me add this.
And this is my fault, everybody. I was goofing around with these right before the show, and I thought
so I have two. I have two different editions of this. Yep, no biggie.
All right. This is the other part from the article by Professor Hess. Good plants can emerge from poor soil. Once again, this is something that the Jacob allegory says that is wrong. Example of interpretations that violate botanical rules. Good plants can emerge from poor soil. That doesn't happen. And then he goes on and talks about it. I don't really care to say any more than that. But I mean, duh. This is not even rocket science. Obviously, good plants are not going to come out of poor soil. That's why you get good soil. Okay? Duh. But the Book of Mormon, the part we read, indicates that that is true. And so now Scott Christopher is going to be asking Luis, well, if you took a tree and put it in bad soil, could it produce good fruit? And poor Luis has to tell the truth.
In the Book of Mormon, it talks about a tree, for example, being planted in a bad part of the vineyard, of the orchard, on bad soil. Would an olive tree grow in bad soil? And if so, what would be the difference between planting it in good soil?
Let's see. It would definitely be a tree that would have less vegetation. It would be smaller. It would be less productive. But I think that if there is a tree that can adapt to bad soil, it is the olive tree.
So my question is, how is Scott Christopher still a member of the church after doing the show?
Yeah. You could see the guy like trying to work with him. It's going to be small. It's not going to really make any fruit. It's probably not going to do that great. But I mean, push comes to shove, I guess the olive tree, maybe if any tree is going to do all right, it's going to be the olive tree.
Yeah, exactly. And so how do they leave this in the movie? I don't understand. I'm glad they did. Obviously, it makes for great programming here on Mormonism Live. But on the two main things that the Professor Hess from BYU says the Jacob allegory gets wrong, they ask an expert, presumably Luis is an expert, they ask him if this would happen, and he tells them, no, it wouldn't, and no, it wouldn't. And they're left going, wow, this is great evidence for the Book of Mormon. And you'll see him summarize it here as the drone flies away, watching him walk into the distance in this olive vineyard or olive orchard. There's some confusion there too, about how fantastic this is. And my goodness, my testimony is strengthened by this information.
Luis, thank you so much. This has been so eye-opening and so cool for what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Thank you. Hopefully we'll get you a copy of the Book of Mormon before we leave. We will. And maybe we'll see you again sometime. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Oh, nice. You threw in a little English for us. It's interesting to see how accurate the allegory is from a purely horticultural standpoint.
Who's writing this?
Yeah. And that happened in part 1 too, where the answer they got was like the opposite, but you just go with it. What other choice do you have? You've flown all the way to Spain. You've taken a camera crew. You've got apologists helping you write the script and make sure you ask the right things. And then the expert tells you the opposite of what you're looking for. what choice do you have to go find another expert? Like, this is the guy. This is who you came to see. He didn't give you the right answer, and you've got no choice but to pretend he did.
It's just amazing to me. I would just have scrapped this whole thing and maybe gone back to the rabbi and featured him for the whole 38 minutes.
Yeah, and let him just spiritualize. That was way better off, right?
Yes.
Okay, here's the next clip.
You know, it's amazing. Everywhere I've traveled so far, there's been a new piece of information or evidence that just continues to add to my appreciation and love for the Book of Mormon, its divinity, if you will. It reminds me a little bit of a verse in Alma 30 that talks about all things denote that there is a God. The allegory of the olive tree is a beautiful example of this evidence that is both beautiful and inspiring at the same time.
All things but olive orchards denote that there is a God.
Yeah, there are way more problems with Jacob chapter 5 than olive horticulture. Let's get into it. So, folks,
Oh, yes.
let me just read here. This is off of another website. There are two major biblical passages that provided structural material for this parable, and a number of shorter passages that supplied secondary ideas. The primary passages are Isaiah's parable of the vineyard, contained in Isaiah chapter 5, 1 through 7, and Paul's discussion of the relationship of Israel to the Gentiles, Romans 11, 16 through 24, in which he uses the metaphor of an olive tree. So in other words, the metaphor or analogy or parable of the vineyard that Isaiah uses is completely different in a completely different place than the parable of the olive tree that Paul uses, or at least whoever the author is that we allege to be Paul. That these two passages provided the framework upon which Joseph Smith built his parable is evident from several sources. Firstly, both passages were quoted by Smith earlier in the Book of Mormon narrative. Isaiah's song of the vineyard is found in 2 Nephi chapter 15, and Paul's section in Colossians was alluded to in 1 Nephi chapter 10, 12 through 14, and other passages. Secondly, several ideas presented in Zenos's parable can be found in these two passages. A well-tended vineyard failed to produce good fruit is also a major theme of Isaiah's passage. The contrast between wild and tame or natural fruit is found in Isaiah. Paul's discourse, Joseph Smith, from Paul's discourse, Joseph Smith obtained the idea of wild and natural branches, cross-grafting branches between trees. There's verbatim quotes from Isaiah, specifically in the landowner's lament, quote, "What could I have done more for my vineyard?" That's right out of Isaiah in Jacob chapter 5, verse 41. It's echoed in Isaiah's parable, quote, "What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it?" So there you see the similarity. While Paul used an olive tree, in light of this, it is significant that the prophet Zenos appears to display some confusion about his metaphor. The parable of the vineyard begins with Israel as an olive tree located in a vineyard, Jacob chapter 5, verse 3. However, halfway through the narrative, the metaphor suddenly switches to the vineyard itself, significantly just at the point that the Book of Mormon quotes Isaiah, Jacob chapter 5, verse 41. From this point on, the author repeatedly refers to the trees of the vineyard, apparently forgetting that the parable started out with olive trees as the primary metaphor, not grapevines. Notice that halfway through Jacob 5, it switches to the fruit of the vineyard, which olives aren't. Now, in today's world, we have this science of figuring out what's a fruit and what's a vegetable, what's this, what's that. But by old standards, if it's sweet, it was a fruit. And if it wasn't, it was a vegetable, right? Like we have this kind of delineation that we sort of do in modern times by looking at whether the thing has seeds or all the other kinds of things we do. But in that day, olives, of course, wouldn't be considered a fruit by any standard. I want to note too that there is Luke chapter 13, 6 through 9 is also in Jacob chapter 5. And I also want to note here, unfruitful branches being honed down and burnt is found in Matthew chapter 3, verse 10, and John chapter 15, verse 6. Matthew chapter 3, verse 10 was quoted verbatim in Alma chapter 5, verse 52, which was dictated before the book of Jacob, according to some theories. Verse 8 of Matthew chapter 3, bring forth therefore fruit meet for repentance, is quoted several times in the Book of Mormon. Alma 12, verse 15, chapter 13, verse 13, and chapter 34, verse 30. And then I want to kind of go here. Isaiah chapter 5, you can pause this and read it. You will see several similarities and even direct overlap with what is used in Jacob chapter 5.
So this is about 20 or 23 chapters before Jacob 5. The allegory of Isaiah is quoted in the Book of Mormon.
Yes. And so essentially, just before Joseph Smith gets to Jacob chapter 5, he is reminded by going into these other two places, Colossians in the New Testament and Isaiah in the Old Testament, and he gets these two thematic ideas, and then just a few chapters later, he meshes them together, but with problems and plagiarizing several pieces of the New Testament, which have no business being in the Book of Mormon anyway. So Isaiah chapter 5, 1 Nephi chapter 10, and then Paul is alluded to. I'm sorry, I said Colossians, but it's Romans. Romans chapter 11 in 1 Nephi 10, 12 through 14. If you compare Isaiah 5 and Romans 11 to the Book of Mormon, you end up seeing that whoever the author of the Book of Mormon is, they are borrowing thematically and even directly exact language from Old and New Testament scriptures. One thing I said to you guys earlier is that, remember, Jacob chapter 5 is supposed to be scripture by a lost prophet, Zenos. We have no record of Zenos ever existing. And here he is using New Testament. He'd be an Old Testament prophet. He is using New Testament language and thematic material in his writings. So the only apologetic response to this would be that the New Testament writers are aware of Zenos, and also the Book of Mormon authors would somehow be aware of Zenos, presumably from the brass plates. Except if the New Testament authors were aware of Zenos, then by that point, we would all know that Zenos existed. It's not that there is these significant parts of the New Testament that are lost, especially when authors are borrowing earlier things. Even things like Q source, people are able to sort of figure out that there is this heavily borrowed material. So I just want to note that. And then I want to finish off here just saying it's not only Isaiah and Romans, it's Luke chapter 13, Matthew chapter 3, John chapter 15. And it shows that some of those copyings there just below. So you can pause that and read those if you'd like.
Can you go back just a second?
Yeah.
This is something that actually surprised me. And I don't know why, but two of the phrases that are virtually unique to Jacob 5 allegory are dunging and cumbered. They're unusual uses of words in the scriptures. And yet in Luke 13, where he's talking about a similar thing, he uses both those expressions. I shall dig about it and dung it. That's from Luke 13:8. And Luke 13:7, the verse before says, why cumbereth it the ground? And both of those expressions we find translated directly into the same English. I don't know if a translation is the correct word. The same words appear in Jacob 5 a number of times.
Yeah. It would almost seem evident that whoever the author of the Book of Mormon is, they are copying directly New Testament scriptures.
Well, if you took this Jacob chapter 5, and that was a creative writing assignment for you in high school, Mr. Reel, and you turned it into your teacher and she was aware of these other background references, what kind of grade do you think you would get?
I not only would get an F and fail the the paper, I probably fail the class and I'm probably expelled for plagiarism.
I think she would flag you for plagiarism at a minimum.
Yeah. I want to note here, remember Joseph and you noted this earlier, Joseph and the Smiths are farmers. Would grafting be understood by them? Fruit trees of the same genus, but different varieties are compatible for grafting. And then it lists all of the various fruit trees that, at least on some level, this sort of horticulture or farming concepts would have been understood by them. As you pointed out, these are farmer families going back generations. So I want to say this in conclusion. Number one, the Smiths were farmers and many fruit trees in the area could be grafted. Joseph would come to this story with a degree of competency to expound on the Old and New Testament scriptures that are on his mind. Number two, the Book of Mormon author already shows they are familiar with the Bible's use of the olive tree grafting and the vineyards, as Isaiah 5 is quoted in 2 Nephi 15, shortly before Jacob 5, and Paul's material seems to be present in 1 Nephi chapter 10. So he is nudged to be thinking about these things because he's already inserting them in an earlier part of the Book of Mormon. That the concepts and themes, this is number three, the concepts and themes in Jacob 5 seem to heavily borrow primarily from Isaiah chapter 5 and Romans 11. And finally, a significant theme seems plagiarized from Luke 13 and other New Testament scriptures are in this chapter of Jacob chapter 5, and that rather than be evidence of an ancient text, at this point, there is little doubt, especially when you combine it with the horticulture heirs, that such is recrafting and plagiarizing to create Jacob chapter 5. Jacob chapter 5 is actually counter evidence, demonstrating that the Book of Mormon is anything but an ancient narrative.
That's a great conclusion. It looks like somebody in the audience, Sarah Ritchie, was pointing out that the Christmas Carol, the 12 Days of Christmas, is replete with cognitive accusatives, or whatever you call it. So there it is, 12 drummers drumming, 11 pipers piping. I guess maids of milking doesn't work, but there's a lot of them that do. Yeah, good point.
Must be an ancient text.
Doubt your doubts.
Yeah.
Good heavens, I think I just channeled the Silver Fox. That sounded just like him, didn't it?
It did. I was going to
find because I'm so hoarse from coughing so much with this hay fever or whatever I've got going on.
Doubt your doubts.
Good. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I do it again?
Doubt your doubts.
Just like him.
Doubt your doubts.
I'll be back.
All right. Now, are you ready for the next clip?
Yes, sir.
You know, it's amazing. Everywhere I've traveled so far, there's been a new piece of information or evidence that just continues to add to my appreciation and love for the Book of Mormon. It's divinity, if you will. It reminds me a little bit of a verse in Alma 30 that talks about all things denote that there is a God. The allegory of the olive tree is a beautiful example of this evidence that is both beautiful and inspiring at the same time.
Just doesn't have anything to do with ancient horticulture. I wonder what they did with Huey's. I don't see him in that last scene. I hope he's okay.
And I think that was actually a replay of something we already did, but let's...
I had more jokes. It's okay.
No, you're good. All right. So now we go to section 4, Moroni's promise.
And please understand, this is just a little over halfway through this already brief. They've got so much evidence that they want to share with us about the Book of Mormon. They take a tenth off the top. They don't talk about it until they get about 5 minutes into it. And now they're a little over halfway through. They've thrown up their hands and they're going to talk. They're going to have a fast and testimony meeting now with one lady from Spain, really, for the rest of the show. And they're going to call it good.
Moroni, the last prophet in the Book of Mormon, invites us to read the book and ask God if it's true. I've accepted Moroni's invitation and have made a personal, prayerful study of the Book of Mormon. I've felt the powerful yet peaceful witness from God of the truthfulness of this book. Yet this spiritual witness is nearly impossible to explain to someone else unless they've gone through it themselves. As a missionary, I saw this happen for people who accepted Moroni's invitation. Miraculous stories of conversion due to the Book of Mormon itself are myriad. They form an amazing body of evidence from real people with real lives that cannot be ignored.
I'm sorry.
Moroni's
Did
promise.
you say something? I was dozing, I think.
No. We're just back to, after all this BS that we have said about things that don't mean what we said they mean. And again, remember, folks, this is their best evidence. If there was better evidence, it'd be the evidence they were presenting. This is the best evidence, and it is so not what it's claimed to be. So now we get to the end where it's like, hey, the evidence doesn't really cut it. So now we have to use the old fallback for Mormonism, which is Moroni's promise. You ask God, God will tell you. And once you have that answer, you can know with a surety that Heavenly Father has told you the Book of Mormon is true. Joseph Smith is his prophet. This is his church. These are his prophets, seers, and revelators. And here's where the priesthood keys reside.
And I will tell you, I can understand if they spent the last 5 minutes doing that, because they always want to give that primacy of place, right? But they know, somebody knows how many episodes of this are planned and are in the works. Somebody knows what the evidences are that they want to put in each one. And I would like to think that if there was a lot of evidence, they would be straining at the bit to cram as much evidence into each episode as they possibly could. But they don't seem to be doing that. They seem to be rationing the evidence and taking a little bit here and a little bit in this episode and a little bit over here, even if when it doesn't mean what we're saying it means, so that they will have enough of their meager supply of evidence to last out through the duration of these videos, however many they're going to have. That's the sense I'm getting.
Yeah. And we were talking about this before the show started. We all know in this space what the apologists like to use as evidence, right? They've pretty much run through it. They're to the point where they're now spending half a video on spiritual experiences because they're running out. I was telling you, I sort of wondered if maybe they would have the festival that's sort of, maybe if you close one eye and squint with the other, you can see it in the Book of Mormon. I forget what the name of that
Festival
was.
of Tabernacles.
Yeah.
King Mosiah, the tents around the temple. Absolutely. That's what's happening there.
You're going to see probably
King Benjamin, I'm sorry, at the beginning of Mosiah. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're going to probably see that spot in Central America where King Benjamin could have stood, and the echo goes a little further of his speaking, right? That's where we're getting to. And folks, we'll be right there to deconstruct those ideas too once we get to them. But they're getting to the bottom of the barrel, and I can't imagine they have 2 more episodes left. That would be hard to envision.
This is how, and remember what the subtitle of this is. We're not putting this burden on them. They have taken this burden upon themselves. They have titled their series, A Marvelous Work and a Wonder, the greatness of the evidences. That's what this whole thing's supposed to be about. So they have set forth the standard which they are supposed to meet, which they have promised us by titling it that. They promised us they're going to meet, and I'm finding that they are not meeting their promises, at least in the way that I would have expected from the title of these videos.
Yeah.
There he goes.
That was a good look.
Well, I never could have imagined that I would have had these opportunities to see and understand the Book of Mormon like this. And I'm so glad that you were able to join me on this episode. We're not done by a long shot. There's still a lot to discover and unravel and explore within this book. A lot of places to go and a lot of people to talk to. I'm Scott Christopher. Thanks for joining me in this episode. We'll be back again soon to uncover more evidence and to hear the stories and testimonies of those people whose lives have been forever changed by a marvelous work.
Can't wait to see you next time, Scott.
I just have this crazy idea, Bill. Wouldn't it be crazy if they got to what I consider to be a really strong evidence for the Book of Mormon that I discovered and published on about the ancient Hebrew numerology in the Book of Mormon? Wouldn't that be crazy if they ended up talking to me about that? So I don't think I'll be on there. They haven't contacted me yet. Do I have a few unanswered phone calls? But if they talk to that would be like a dream come true. Oh, please let it be. Let it be.
Yeah, they can't go to the expert on that one, can they?
Well, I'm right here.
You'd welcome that chance to talk to them.
Yeah,
it'd be
I
fun
would,
to-
and I would run it up the flagpole and salute it.
Yeah, they'd have to take you to some cool destination and talk about Don Quixote, which, by the way, I thought it was so interesting. They start off the whole video. We didn't play that clip, but start off the whole video talking about a fictional story of Don Quixote and relating it to finding the truth of the Book of Mormon. I just want to say one more thing here, RFM, in regards to spiritual experiences. For the believers who have followed us this far, I know in Mormonism, we are told that the Holy Ghost is the way that we know that things are true. It doesn't matter what Bill Reel says or what Radio Free Mormon says, what Maven says. It's that I felt the Spirit and I know the church is true. And I just want to say, in a way, the church has tricked you, because there's a normal thing that all humans experience called elevation emotion. Go into Google, type it in, check it out on Wikipedia. All humans feel, and they can be manipulated falsely to feel it. It's not something that happens because good things happen. It's something that the human mind and body experiences simply by perceiving that something good is happening. But elevation emotion is where you feel a warmth in your chest, primarily in your heart region, a burning of the bosom. You will get tingles. You will have your brain tell you, kind of expand and have like a feeling of goodness and well-being for the world. And I want to note that, so on one hand, everybody can feel that and they can be manipulated to feel it. Mormonism comes along and goes, you know what? We can utilize that to have people feel the Spirit and know that we're telling the truth. Another side of the coin is that there are numerous religions out there, and almost all of them have adherents who know by some spiritual experience that their religion is the one true religion. If I walked into a Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses and I said, would everyone here who knows that the Jehovah's Witness faith is the one true faith and knows it because of some spiritual experience that you have had, half the people in that room would raise their hand. Now, if you go to YouTube, there are 3 videos I would highly recommend. Spiritual Witnesses, you see them on the screen there, Spiritual Witnesses, and then the one at the bottom, Can She Really Know, is sort of a shorter cut of that top video. And then Mormon Stories did a conversation with LDS Discussions called Mormon Spiritual Witnesses, episode 1788. When you watch those 3, what you will learn is that everyone across time in all religions, everyone across this moment in all the religions that exist today, there are adherents of every religion who feel spiritual things and know that their faith is true. And once you understand that, it becomes, you would have to be biased in some way to go, yeah, but I know my experience is true. I wasn't tricked. And in some way, their experience isn't, because some of these religions, their claims absolutely contradict the truth claims of Mormonism. In other words, both things can't be true. And whatever excuse you make for them, it would be inappropriate for you to grant some extra loophole that your testimony's true, but theirs isn't. And once you acknowledge that maybe yours is just as false as theirs, now you have to figure out what really does indicate that something is true.
Good point. We call it special pleading in the law, where you plead something special for your client that you would never, plead for anybody else who wasn't your client. I just want everybody to know, I'm not totally being pie in the sky about that idea that they might come up with something that I've written about, because over at Scripture Central, they have many of my papers from my apologetic days published and cited to regularly on their website.
I was just going to look it up here, Scripture Central, because I saw it the other day. Here we go.
Be careful. Don't put it up there. Do not put it up there.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I should not have done that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Okay.
Hello.
I'm glad I didn't have it up on the screen.
It's under a different name than Radio Free Mormon, believe it or not.
I saw why we couldn't do that, but they weren't kind enough.
Oh, lady.
They weren't kind enough to name you Radio Free Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I did it under another pseudonym.
I'm so glad I didn't have that already on the screen. It would have definitely happened. So,
Okay. Well, that's
All
good.
right.
We've avoided catastrophe yet again
Yeah.
on Mormonism Live.
Yeah.
Are we taking any calls tonight?
Yeah, but I didn't get any of that
Are we
ready.
done?
So,
I don't know. Are we done?
it's up to you. We can certainly do calls if you'd like, but I didn't get ourselves ready to do that, so it'll take me a minute.
That's
Maybe
good.
what do
While
you think?
you're doing that, I just wanted, just for a point of curiosity, I just remembered a little bit ago something that I saw ages ago. I'm going to go ahead and share this. It was done as an art thing, so I don't know how much this like would actually be realistic, but it's a tree of 40 fruit and if yeah, so 40 different kinds of fruit tree branches were all grafted onto this one tree, and it's very pretty looking. Again, I don't know what the yield would be from that, if it'd be useful at all, or if any of these really even survived very long. But I just thought it was really pretty looking and really cool, and it fascinated me. It's this, but like with the idea that if I have like a really tiny property or something, maybe I could do something like this someday, and yeah, have a tree with all these different kinds of fruits. So yeah,
That is beautiful.
and I can see if there's any other comments to share. I had a few people have been asking about funding, and of course, like I think many things in the church, it's a bit masked. I know on Mormonish with Rebecca Biblioteca, she and Landon were wondering if the event that they were attending and then disinvited and reinvited to, and then again disinvited to. It was a fundraising event where it was something ridiculous. Rebecca, you have to tell me in the comments what
It was
the
Moroni
seat
Day.
price was.
It was
Yeah,
Moroni
it was.
Day, last September 22nd with Elder Raz Band as the
Yeah,
keynote
it
speaker, I
was
think.
expensive,
Was it
if I
500
recall.
bucks?
Something, yeah. And anyway, so Rebecca's wondering if maybe this was the project that was the fundraiser for, but we don't know. We don't know. So,
It's just that was only last September, and I'm sure this was well under production by then to be released now in March.
oh, you think so?
Oh, yeah.
I
Of
know everything
2024.
I ever produce is always done really quickly. It's done and it's put out there. So I don't know what
That's
it's
why our
like to
stuff
have
doesn't
that
look
long
as
of a
good as that.
timeline.
But strangely, our stuff is much more factually accurate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's easier when you can just go with the facts. So maybe that's it. When you've got to tell a story, then you need a lot more time to storyboard that and build it up and make a lot of, I don't know, maybe there was a lot of editing done and this really is the best, the cream of the crop, and what they cut out was way worse. Who knows?
Yeah, can you imagine it being worse than that?
I mean, yeah,
And then
honestly.
that last third, we didn't talk about it. Go ahead and watch it for yourselves, please. We want the numbers up there above 62,000 for them. But go ahead and watch it, and you'll see what we're talking about. There's this nice Spanish lady that Scott talks to. He sits down on a park bench with her in a park, and she tells a story about her husband, who's now deceased, and how he wanted to find out what was true. And he went to this church, he went to that religion. They packed up everything, went to India for a while or something. Then he comes back, and there's a Book of Mormon on top of the box. When he opens it up, oh my gosh, I got to read it. He reads the whole thing like Parley P. Pratt in one setting. Then he runs off to find the missionaries and get baptized. And that's what they spend the last quarter to a third of this production on.
I was thinking, we meant to say this, or I meant to say this at the beginning, but with this whole show, I had said earlier to you guys that it can be summed up by they're trying so hard to connect the Book of Mormon to the ancient past when everything has a contemporary.
Call has been
with Joseph
forwarded to
Smith.
an automated voice
Oh.
messaging system.
Sorry about that.
Hearing it from Bill. Yeah, so it's just it doesn't matter how much you can make a connection to the ancient history when, everything. Joseph had olive trees, he knew about grafting, there were almas around. It doesn't help. And yeah.
No, when
Bill,
you're
we
going to
have a
take it
caller.
came to pass as a definite evidence for
Oh.
the Book of Mormon, when at the same time as you're saying it's all over the Old Testament, you know that you're in the tank and you're not able to see things objectively.
All right, I've got one call here. Another person did call. I think I did cut it off. I think her name was Sarah. So Sarah, if you want to call back, I'd love to have you be able to talk with us. But I believe this is Ted. Ted, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, go ahead, my friend. You're on Mormonism Live with Radio Free Mormon and Bill Reel.
Yes, I was just commenting because one of the things that you guys didn't mention, and I loved watching this show, but you guys didn't piece together the olive tree and the vineyard, which was part of that whole series. And if you read the Book of Mormon and see those two stories together, you can tell like where they piece things from, because that's one of the big things that they tout is the how they had those two stories together and pieced it together. But anyways,
So
yeah,
Ted,
that was one of the things. But I watched that.
So Ted, is what you're
Yes,
saying?
sir.
If we took the sources and put them together in a different way, that it would have been more obvious where the cribbing was coming from?
Yes, sir. That's what I feel, because when I first read the Book of Mormon and I was like taught by the elders, I was like, well, yeah, maybe that is amazing. But then once I learned like where they pieced it from, it's like that's ridiculous. Like you can see where it came from. But yeah, that was my point to it. And I don't know what is going on lately, but they have the Heartland theory and the Mesoamerican theory, and they're both right and they're both wrong. It's pieced together, but yeah, that was my point to that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, thank you. I
sir.
appreciate that. And I think that's true. If you go back and if you actually line those up together and do your own study on it rather than listen to people talk about it, however erudite that discussion may be, it's always more powerful to me if I'm seeing it myself side by side. And I'm going, that was why I had that reaction, Ted, to cumbering and dunging from Luke chapter 13. And I went, oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding. They even took those two verbs and put them in the allegory. It seems an obvious case of borrowing.
And what I thought he was going to say was that olive trees wouldn't be in vineyards. Olive trees would be in orchards. It's a tree. And hence vineyards would be grapes and vined. Uh, but that was something I actually looked into this week to just double check. There were multiple articles that spoke about why olive trees are planted in and around vineyards. And so that is a real connection. Not that he got it right. Again, we can clearly show that he's talking about Isaiah and talking about Romans. So some folks have been critical of the church and the Book of Mormon by saying Joseph's a dummy. Why has he got olive trees and vineyards? Everybody knows vineyards are grapes. And I just want you to know the reason we never went into that is because it's actually legitimate that olive trees would be planted in and around vineyards. FYI.
Except if I'm correct, and if I remember Dan Vogel correctly, he was pointing out that such a system of planting the two together would be in violation of the law of Moses.
Yeah, so they generally wouldn't be right next to each other, but
not with observant Jews.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
And Dan, if you're out there and still watching, if you could put that reference, because I think it was from, I don't know, Deuteronomy or something.
Yeah. And Sarah never called back, and I don't have any other phone calls from somebody. I don't know if there maybe was an issue with the phone line. The first time I tried to call the call-in studio, it messed up, and so I had to call myself back. And I'm not seeing any other calls come through. But
sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, super sorry about that. I will just say, this is actually really easy. These have probably been two of the easiest episodes that we've done in the last 6 months. Having this conversation around a marvelous work, the greatness of the evidence, part 1, and then part 2. And I hope they do 10 more, because I think it really gives us an easy way to sort of get together and show that this just isn't what these guys are claiming.
No, how would you subtitle this? Instead of the greatness of the evidences, what would your subtitle be for the marvelous work in a wonder series, Bill?
I looked into proposed evidence and I left the church.
And that part may yet to be written for Scott Christopher.
Yeah. All right, my friend. I had a blast.
Deuteronomy 22:9. Thank you so much, Dan.
Oh, look at that. Neat. Okay. Anything else from you, RFM?
That's it. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel for another episode of Mormonism Live.
This idea that the church is hiding something, which we would have to say as two apostles who have covered the world and know the history of the church and know the integrity of the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12 from the beginning of time. There has been no attempt on the part in any way of the church leaders trying to hide anything from anyone.